Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a single missile,
Just one.
right? Just one single missile. It costs $10 million to produce.
Which is just a staggering amount of money for a single projectile.
It is. And it takes 2 full years of highly specialized labor and manufacturing just to build this one weapon.
2 years of constant work.
Now imagine that after all that time and, all that treasure, combat data shows it barely even works.
It routinely misses its targets.
Exactly, it misses. And yet, the country building it, which is the wealthiest, most technologically advanced superpower on Earth, just keeps ordering more of them.
Basically printing money for defense contractors, right?
Yeah, while its actual military capability just hollows out from the inside.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't some hypothetical scenario. I mean, this is the current reality of the American military-industrial complex.
And it perfectly encapsulates this profound, almost dizzying paradox that we're bringing to you today. Welcome to a new deep dive.
We are so glad you're joining us.
Today, our mission is to examine a really fascinating conversation between Dutch philosopher Adver Broeg and political advisor Christian Alting von Gussau.
And their goal in that discussion was to explore a massive contradiction.
Right, because we're looking at the United States as it approaches its 250th anniversary. And if you just look at the headlines, what do you see?
You see a nation supposedly bogged down by catastrophic political corruption, hyperpolarization.
Right, decaying infrastructure. And this military overreach that seems entirely disconnected from reality.
But then you look at the economic data.
Yes, and that is where the paradox hits you.
Because despite all of that institutional rot, this same nation somehow boasts the most vibrant, resilient, and innovative economy in the world.
It is quite literally leaving European economic growth in the dust.
It really is.
So the question we're asking you to consider today is, how is that even possible? How can a political system be so seemingly dysfunctional while its economic engine is just so incredibly unstoppable?
And to understand the next 250 years of America, we have to look past the noisy headlines. We have to examine the deep structural DNA of the country.
Right. And to see those hidden gears, we are starting with a very sudden, very shocking event that recently rippled through Washington, D.C.
A single event that basically functions like an X-ray of the American political machine.
We are talking about the sudden death of Senator Lindsey Graham.
Right. He was on a major trip to Kyiv, negotiating a massive, unprecedented sanctions package against Russia.
And this was not just a standard diplomatic photo op.
Right, not at all. He was there doing the really heavy lifting, corralling Republican support, bridging these massive divides to push forward a highly aggressive foreign policy agenda.
Right, so he succeeds, he returns to the States, goes on television to explain the package, and then shortly after suffers a fatal torn aorta.
Just incredibly sudden.
A torn aorta, when I was looking into the medical side of that, it's literally the main artery of your heart suddenly rupturing.
There's almost no warning with that.
No warning at all. And the political reaction actually mirrored that suddenness.
Yeah, it wasn't just standard political warning.
No, both sides of the aisle seemed genuinely destabilized by his absence.
Because he was such a fixture.
Exactly. It makes me think of a complex building where you pull out a single load-bearing pillar.
That's a great way to put it.
You might not have even noticed that specific pillar before, but the second it snaps, the entire structure groans, and you realize how much weight it was actually holding up.
Right.
Why did the loss of this one specific guy send such massive shockwaves through a system that has, 100 senators?
Well, to understand that weight, you have to look at the specific, highly unusual function he served in the Senate.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Lindsey Graham was a master of political metamorphosis, but he was also remarkably consistent in one core area.
Consistent how?
Think about his trajectory.
Yeah.
He began as an incredibly vocal critic of Donald Trump within the Republican Party. I mean, he warned against his nomination in the harshest possible terms.
I remember that. He was completely opposed to him.
Right. But as the political winds shifted, he completely morphed. He adapted and became one of Trump's most vital, most visible allies.
So he was a chameleon. But are you saying he didn't change his actual underlying beliefs?
Exactly. He changed his alliances to preserve his ability to execute his core beliefs.
Which were what?
His ideological identity was anchored deeply as a classic neoconservative hawk.
Let's break down that term, neoconservative hawk, for a second, because we throw that around a lot in the news. But what does it actually mean in practice?
In practice, It means an unyielding belief in aggressive interventionist foreign policy.
Like using the military to solve problems first.
Yes. A neoconservative hawk fundamentally believes that American military and economic power should be used actively, often preemptively, to shape global events.
Overthrow hostile regimes, that sort of thing.
Overthrow regimes, enforce a specific vision of global order, exactly. Graham's rhetoric was always centered on, finishing the job.
Right.
If you look at his stance on Iran, for instance, he consistently advocated for overwhelmingly heavy kinetic measures.
He was deeply entrenched in the broader Middle East strategy.
Very deeply. And he was heavily tied to the Israel lobby, which provided massive political and financial backing for his specific brand of interventionism.
Okay, so he has this rigid ideology regarding war and intervention. But he also has this fluid ability to align with someone like Trump.
Right.
How did those two things coexist, especially since Trump actively campaigned on ending the so-called forever wars?
Well, that is the crux of his power. Graham functioned as an oil man within the machinery of the Senate.
An oil man,
Yeah.
like an actual oil tycoon.
No, an oil man as in he was the lubricator. He oiled the gears.
Oh, I see.
He was one of those increasingly rare figures who could comfortably walk across party lines and broker deals.
Ah, so if the Democrats needed to plug an agenda item related to overseas funding.
Right, or if the Republicans needed to push through defense spending without fracturing their base, Graham could bridge that gap.
He operated above the standard performative partisan fray.
Exactly. He was always there to push a unified, hawkish agenda.
And so when you suddenly remove the lubricator, the gears just grind together.
And it forces everyone to look at the machine itself.
So what does his absence actually reveal about those forever wars? I mean, Trump loses a crucial ally, sure.
Yeah, but it exposes something deeper. It reveals the underlying institutional momentum in Washington.
Meaning that beneath the surface-level shouting matches between Republicans and Democrats on cable news, there is this unified, almost subconscious agreement on military engagement.
He was the human embodiment of that consensus.
Yeah.
So removing him doesn't stop the machine. The military-industrial complex is far too vast for one man's death to halt it.
Right, obviously.
But it strips away the political cover. It reveals that the forever wars aren't just an ideological choice made by a few bad actors.
They are the default setting of the modern American political apparatus.
Precisely.
That structural reality brings up a huge red flag about how long these people are actually pulling the levers.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Graham was serving his 5th term in the Senate when he died. Senate term is 6 years.
Which means he was looking at 30 years in office.
30 years. I mean, he entered the Senate when flip phones were cutting-edge technology.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
So was the American political system actually built for people to stay in power this long? Was it engineered to have a permanent ruling class staying for 3 decades?
Actually, it was engineered to prevent exactly that.
Really?
Yeah, when you contrast modern career politicians with the original blueprint drawn up by the Founding Fathers, the divergence is just staggering.
Okay, walk us through the original blueprint.
The entire architecture of the early American Republic was meticulously designed to prevent entrenched, multi-decade power. Let's look at the House of Representatives as a prime example.
Okay.
They were deliberately given 2-year terms.
2 years is nothing. I mean, by the time you figure out where the bathrooms are in the Capitol building, you're running for re-election.
Right.
What was the psychology behind making it so incredibly short?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychology was rooted in the concept of the citizen legislator.
Meaning what, exactly?
The idea was that ordinary citizens, farmers in Virginia, merchants in Boston, local businessmen, they would temporarily leave their fields or their shops.
So it wasn't a career.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They would travel to the Capitol, serve for a very brief, intense period to handle the nation's immediate business, and then they would go home.
They would return to the very laws they just passed and live under them as private citizens.
Exactly.
And my understanding is that this originally barely paid anything, right? It was closer to jury duty than a corporate gig.
Initially, they were uncompensated. Later on, they received a per diem, which is basically a small allowance just to cover the cost of the horse ride to Washington and a room at a boarding house.
Wow.
It was a civic duty, a temporary sacrifice of your personal time, completely antithetical to the modern concept of a lucrative lifelong career path.
But then you had the Senate. Graham was a senator, and they get those 6-year terms.
Right.
If the goal was to keep power temporary, why give the Senate 3 times the length of the House?
Because the Senate was designed with a fundamentally different mechanism of control in mind.
Mm.
The House was meant to be the hot, fast-moving engine of the general populace, changing rapidly with the public mood every 2 years.
Okay, so what was the Senate?
The Senate was the cooling saucer. It was meant to represent the states as sovereign entities equally.
So whether you were tiny Rhode Island or massive New York, you got two senators.
Exactly. The founders envisioned the Senate as an aristocratic upper house, a college of cardinals, so to speak.
A college of cardinals. I really like that analogy.
Mhm.
So a collection of seasoned elders, the princes of the political elite, designed to be slower, more deliberate, and shielded from the immediate passions of the mob.
Yes, and originally they were appointed by state legislatures, not directly elected by the public.
Oh, right. I always forget that.
The 6-year term was meant to give them the stability to make unpopular but necessary long-term decisions without constantly worrying about an impending election.
Okay, I have to push back on this whole design, though.
Go for it.
The entire point, the catalyst for the American Revolution, was getting rid of a king.
Right.
King George III was an absolute tyrant in their eyes, and they fought a brutal, freezing war to escape his centralized power.
Yes, they did.
So how did a group of men so terrified of monarchy accidentally design a system where, fast forward to today, presidents act like pseudo-kings using executive orders and politicians stay in power until they're in their 80s?
Well, the blueprint didn't necessarily go wrong. It collided with the unique psychology of the American culture itself.
What do you mean?
If we zoom out and look at the psychological makeup of the Founding Fathers, we see a brilliant but highly paranoid understanding of human nature.
Paranoid in what sense?
Well, this group was a diverse mix. You had Puritans with a deep belief in original sin, Enlightenment thinkers, Freemasons, one Catholic signer of the Declaration.
Right, a real mix of worldviews.
But despite all their theological differences, they shared an acute awareness of human weakness. They believed deeply that power is an inherently corrupting force.
They believed that anyone, no matter how noble their intentions, would inevitably try to grab more power once they tasted it.
Yes, they anticipated the ambition and the greed. And that is the entire philosophical foundation of the checks and balances system.
Pitting the legislative, executive, and judicial branches against each other in this perpetual cage match of ambition.
Exactly. John Adams, the second president, he wrote obsessively about this. He was terrified that the American presidency would naturally gravitate toward the pomp and absolute authority of a monarch.
But what actually caused that gravitation? Why did the presidency become so imperial over time?
This is the profound irony of the American experiment. The very cultural DNA that makes America an economic powerhouse is the same drive that infects the political class.
You're talking about the spirit of rugged individualism.
Yes, the relentless Protestant work ethic.
Right.
The drive that allows a citizen to build a massive railroad empire or a huge tech monopoly from scratch.
Right.
When you put an aggressively ambitious American into the Oval Office, that entrepreneurial drive doesn't just turn off.
It pivots.
Exactly. Instead of maximizing profit, they relentlessly seek to maximize their executive power.
So the same cultural impulse that built Standard Oil and Apple is the impulse that makes a president want to bypass Congress and rule by decree.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
They view the limitations of the Constitution the same way a CEO views a frustrating government regulation.
As an obstacle to be innovated around, every single president, regardless of their party, pushes the boundaries of their constitutional authority slightly further than the last one,
Finding legal loopholes, expanding executive orders.
stretching the definition of national security. It's constant.
It's fascinating to contrast that with how Europe handled power, because European history is just a long, bloody timeline of actual kings and emperors.
Right.
How did they approach the limitation of centralized power compared to the Americans?
The contrast is incredibly revealing. Let's look at England after the Glorious Revolution of 1688.
Okay.
You had a situation where the wealthy nobles, the patricians, essentially fired their absolute monarch.
Fired the king.
Basically, they brought in a new one, William of Orange, but under strict conditions. Influenced by thinkers like John Locke, they established parliamentary sovereignty.
So the aristocracy worked deliberately to keep the central monarch weak.
Yes, they dispersed the power among themselves. You saw a similar dynamic in the Netherlands with the regents. They preferred a decentralized, consensus-based power structure among the elite.
So in Europe, the elites teamed up to neuter the king. But in America, the pursuit of total individual success ironically centralized massive, almost royal power into the single office of the presidency.
The culture demanded a powerful executive, even if the founders tried to build cages to contain him.
But do those cages still work at all?
They are constantly tested. But it is important to note that the founder system hasn't entirely failed. The legal checks and balances still have teeth.
Give us an example.
In the source material, there is a very recent, highly illustrative example of this pendulum swinging back against executive overreach.
What happened?
A federal judge abruptly threw out a highly controversial sweetheart tax deal that Donald Trump had supposedly secured with his own Department of Justice.
A deal seemingly designed to shield him from severe future prosecution over complex tax issues, right?
Yes. And the judge didn't just ask for revisions. They looked at an agreement brokered by the executive branch and completely invalidated it.
Tossed it right in the shredder.
Tossed it out. It proves that despite the immense creeping power of the modern presidency, the judicial branch can still step in and act as a hard stop.
So a single judge can still look at the most powerful man in the country and say, no, you have exceeded your authority.
The mechanical design built by those paranoid men in powdered wigs still functions to slap the wrist of corrupt human nature.
I hear that, and I mean, it's somewhat comforting that a judge can still hit the brakes on a specific legal maneuver, but it feels like focusing on the legal checks and balances misses the massive elephant in the room.
Which is?
The legal system works in a courtroom, sure, but a totally new, massive variable has completely hacked the political system from the outside. A variable the founders couldn't have possibly anticipated back in 1787.
And that is the corrosive, overwhelming, inescapable power of big money.
Yes. Let's dive into the financialization of U.S. politics, because the romantic ideal of the farmer leaving his field for 2 years, that is completely dead.
It is entirely dead. Today, securing a seat at the table is a multi-million-dollar industrial enterprise.
Let's go back to that 2-year term for the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
If you are a politician today and you have to run for re-election every 24 months, I mean, the math is just terrifying.
It's an exhausting reality.
If a campaign costs millions of dollars, you literally never stop campaigning. I'm imagining it like a nightmare arcade game.
An arcade game.
Yeah. You're playing the game of governing, but the screen is constantly flashing insert coin.
That is painfully accurate.
And you have to constantly shove millions of quarters into the machine just to keep the screen from going black. You can't focus on reading the bills or understanding the legislation.
Because you are trapped in a relentless daily cycle of call time.
Right. Sitting in a windowless room, dialing wealthy donors just to politically survive.
The sheer volume of quarters required to keep that game going is astronomical. And we have to ask, where do those millions of quarters actually come from?
They certainly don't come from everyday citizens chipping in $5 through a website.
No. The vast, overwhelming majority of the funding comes from mega lobbies and massive corporate PACs.
We're talking about the National Rifle Association, the massive pharmaceutical conglomerates.
The Israel lobby we mentioned earlier with Lindsey Graham.
And the absolute titan of them all, the military-industrial complex.
These entities aren't just donating out of civic pride, they're purchasing policy.
They are funding the political survival of these representatives, and in exchange, they expect a return on their investment.
But the financialization is just one half of the hack.
What's the other half?
The other half is the structural manipulation of the electoral game itself. We have to look at the mechanics of redistricting, or what is commonly known as gerrymandering.
This is a concept that is so crucial to understand. Gerrymandering is when the state legislatures literally redraw the geographical maps of the voting districts, right?
Yes.
But how does that actually protect the money? How does drawing a weirdly shaped map guarantee a political outcome?
It comes down to two specific techniques that the source highlights: packing and cracking.
Packing and cracking, explain that.
State politicians use incredibly sophisticated voter data to draw district lines. Let's say you are a Republican legislature.
Okay.
You will pack as many Democratic voters as possible into a single weirdly shaped district.
Yeah.
You concede that one seat, but by doing so, you dilute their voting power across the rest of the state. Or you will crack a dense Democratic neighborhood. You split it into 3 different districts where they are suddenly the minority in each one.
So the politicians are essentially choosing their voters rather than the voters choosing their politicians.
Precisely the outcome. And both parties do this ruthlessly whenever they hold power in a state.
They draw the maps to create safe seats.
Yes. districts that mathematically lean so heavily Democrat or so heavily Republican that the incumbent who wins the primary is practically guaranteed to win the general election.
So the real money and the vicious, highly funded political fights only happen in the tiny handful of remaining contested seats nationwide.
It's a completely manufactured, artificial landscape designed to protect the incumbents and, by extension, protect the interests of the capital funding them.
But wait, if the maps are rigged and everyone knows the campaigns are funded by billionaires and massive corporations, why hasn't it broken the system entirely?
What do you mean?
Why do voters continue to participate in a system they know is fundamentally compromised?
Because the compromise has been normalized over decades, and the ethical lines have been masterfully blurred. The system provides the illusion of fierce choice while maintaining structural consistency.
Wow.
It's also vital to understand the personal financial trajectory of the politicians themselves.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Politicians almost always enter federal office already wealthy. I mean, you have to be, just to survive the initial phases of a campaign.
Sure.
But more shockingly, they routinely leave office exponentially wealthier than when they entered.
Okay, I need you to explain how that is legal. Because America has these ostensibly strict ethics guidelines, massive disclosure forms, rules against insider trading.
On paper, yes.
So how are they accumulating massive wealth while on a government salary?
Because within those strict rules exists a massive, highly lucrative gray area. Under current ethical guidelines, you can legally maintain certain business interests, stock portfolios, and real estate holdings while serving in office.
Let me get this straight. You can be a sitting senator, actively writing the laws that regulate the banking industry.
Yes, while simultaneously holding a massive portfolio of banking stocks, or even owning a consulting firm on the side.
Yes. The conflict of interest isn't a glitch in the system. It is baked into the operating model.
That is wild.
And here is where it gets truly dangerous for the democratic process. Because this reliance on massive corporate funding and the pursuit of personal wealth applies equally to both Democrats and Republicans, a silent merger happens.
A merger?
On the most crucial systemic issues, massive financial bailouts, banking deregulation, and overwhelmingly foreign policy and military spending, the two fiercely competing parties essentially merge into a singular entity.
A uniparty.
Exactly, an uniparty.
So all the screaming on cable news, the viral tweets, the performative outrage during congressional hearings, that's just professional wrestling.
It's entirely performative. Behind closed doors, when it comes to the actual ledgers and the deployment of capital, they're completely aligned.
They're aligned by necessity. They serve the same donors. And this consolidation was only accelerated by recent legal shifts. Consider the changes to campaign finance laws during the Obama administration, which opened the floodgates for even larger amounts of untraceable dark money to flow into political action committees.
So the financial agenda dictates the policy agenda entirely regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican is sitting in the Oval Office.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to make sure we are neutrally reporting the source's observation here because they bring up both sides of the political spectrum.
Right. The dialogue notes that the voters aren't entirely blind to this.
Exactly. If you look at the populist right, the May GA movement, one of their core animating grievances is a deep hatred for the forever wars and the globalist elite.
Yes.
And if you look at the populist left, the emerging socialist Democrat or Marxist wing, represented by figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Their core grievance is the overwhelming influence of Wall Street and big money in politics.
It's fascinating. Both of these extreme populist movements are actually reacting to the exact same phenomenon.
They are a political immune response to the uniparty reality.
The establishment wings of both the Republican and Democratic parties are desperately dependent on corporate funding.
And the populist right and the populist left are essentially screaming at their own establishment leaders, rebelling against the corporate grip that has hollowed out actual ideological representation.
But despite those rebellions, the uniparty keeps rolling. And you mentioned that this corporate grip is most entrenched in one specific sector.
We touched on it with Lindsey Graham, but we need to dive deep into the absolute behemoth that is the military-industrial complex.
Actually, you called it something slightly different earlier. You called it the military-industrial digital complex.
The addition of digital is crucial because the nature of the beast has evolved. The scale of this complex is almost incomprehensible to the average citizen.
Give us a sense of that scale.
We are talking about the United States spending thousands of billions of dollars on defense. To try and put that into perspective, the U.S. vastly outstrips the combined military spending of China, Russia, and the entire European continent.
Thousands of billions. That's not just a line item in a budget. That is an entire self-sustaining macro economy layered over the country.
It is an economy entirely dedicated to the business of war. War and the perpetual escalating preparation for war has become an incredibly lucrative business model.
And there is a chilling historical reality at play here, right?
Yes. Once a nation builds a military apparatus of this sheer magnitude, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The apparatus cannot sit idle. It must be used.
Because if you don't use the weapons, you don't need to order more of them.
Exactly.
And if you don't order more, the factories close, the shareholders panic, and the politicians lose their campaign funding.
The pressure to deploy forces, to consume the munitions, to test the systems in real-world theaters so that the next generation of contracts can be justified becomes an overwhelming, invisible gravity in Washington.
This brings me back to the paradox of the Oval Office. Here's where it gets really interesting. If Trump campaigned heavily on ending the forever wars and voters claimed to hate them, the source notes Trump ended up engaging in even more conflict.
He did. Drone strikes, escalating tensions.
Why is the Oval Office, the commander-in-chief, powerless to stop the war machine?
Because the machine is no longer driven by military strategy. It is driven by financial algorithms.
Explain that.
To understand why the Oval Office is captured, we have to look at how the nature of the complex has digitized. We aren't just talking about building steel tanks or forging bullets anymore.
Right, it's all AI and cyber networks.
There's a concept from the early 20th century philosopher Oswald Spengler that is incredibly relevant here.
Oswald Spengler, he wrote The Decline of the West, right? What was his warning?
He wrote extensively about the life cycle of civilizations, and he issued a profound warning about technology. He predicted a time when high finance would completely hijack engineering.
Meaning the money men take over the drafting tables from the actual builders and scientists.
Exactly. And that is exactly what has happened to the American defense industry.
So it's not about making good weapons anymore.
No, the primary goal is to design systems that are complex enough to justify massive, long-term, multi-decade government contracts. They are engineering financial instruments that happen to look like weapons.
It's not about winning a war. It's about winning a government contract and ensuring that contract lasts for 30 years.
Precisely. And there is a devastating specific example of this financial hijacking in action cited in the dialogue. Let's look at the data provided by an MIT researcher named Postal.
Okay, what did he look at?
He did a deep analysis of the U.S. Patriot missile system. The Patriot is often touted as the crown jewel of American air defense.
Right, going back to my example at the very beginning of the show.
Yes. A single Patriot interceptor missile costs roughly $10 million to produce.
The $10 million for one missile that blows up once.
Yes. And it takes nearly 2 full years of complex manufacturing to build that single missile. Because of the sheer cost and time, they only produce about 600 of them a year.
Okay, so you'd assume a boutique weapon that expensive and that difficult to build is basically flawless.
But according to Postal's rigorous analysis of its performance in actual combat scenarios, it performs terribly.
Wait, I need to understand this. How does a $10 million missile not work? What is it failing to do?
It comes down to the physics of missile defense. It's often described as trying to hit a bullet with another bullet.
Which sounds impossible.
The Patriot radar systems might track an incoming ballistic missile, but the interceptors frequently fail to actually destroy the warhead.
So they miss.
Sometimes they just clip the tail, altering its trajectory but allowing the explosive payload to still detonate on the ground. Sometimes the software gets confused by debris. The system is incredibly fragile in real-world, chaotic combat environments.
But despite these massive functional flaws, the contracts continue. The money keeps flowing.
And it gets even darker when you compare that $10 million misfire to what the rest of the world is doing.
Right, because while the U.S. is pouring billions into these massively bloated legacy systems.
And we haven't even mentioned the Joint Strike Fighter program, which is notoriously delayed and trillions of dollars over budget.
Yeah, while all that is happening, America's adversaries are actually innovating. Countries like Russia and increasingly Iran are aggressively developing and deploying hypersonic missiles.
That is the critical technological blind spot. Hypersonic missiles travel at immense speeds, constantly maneuvering in the atmosphere,
making them incredibly difficult for a traditional, rigid system like the Patriot to track.
These adversaries are building much cheaper, highly effective asymmetrical weapons that the U.S. currently lacks the ability to reliably counter.
So we're basically building boutique, overpriced legacy systems for profit, not for modern warfare.
It raises a terrifying question. Is the United States experiencing a severe form of hyperinflation specifically isolated within its military technology?
The financial tail is completely wagging the military dog.
Exactly.
That is a staggering disconnect between the budget and the reality. But there is a deeply tragic irony here, too.
What's that?
We are sitting here talking about the cynical boardroom business of war, the spreadsheets, the lobbyists, the faulty tech.
Right.
But that cynicism exists in total isolation from the genuine, on-the-ground sentiment of the American people, and more importantly, the soldiers themselves.
The contrast is profoundly striking. Despite the utter failures of the leadership class, everyday Americans possess a deep, almost sacred respect for their military.
Right. You see this vividly if you travel through the country. Small towns in Florida and North Carolina are draped in banners honoring veterans.
You see the yellow ribbons everywhere. The cultural reverence for the soldier, for the idea of service and sacrifice, is incredibly strong and genuine.
And yet, what happens to those very same kids when they take off the uniform and come home?
That is where the institutional betrayal happens. Institutionally, veterans are frequently abandoned.
Even though the U.S. government operates this massive leviathan called the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs,
Which has a budget of hundreds of billions of dollars. And yet, the system is notoriously broken. Veterans face agonizingly long wait times for basic care.
countless veterans end up on the streets battling severe, untreated PTSD, physical trauma, all on their own.
The society reveres them as heroes, but the institution discards them as broken equipment once they are no longer useful to the profit margins of the war machine.
It's heartbreaking, and looking at that dynamic, it makes me think about how America approaches the rest of the world.
In what sense?
Well, I looked at American foreign policy over the last few decades, and it feels like watching a brilliant, incredibly enthusiastic teenager trying to perform open-heart surgery.
That's a powerful image.
They read a book about it, they have the most expensive scalpels in the hospital, but they have absolutely no idea what they are actually doing to the patient on the table.
This raises an important question.
Right. How much of this global intervention is actually driven by the pure greed of the defense contractors, and how much is driven by just a terrifyingly naive optimism?
It is an explosive combination of both. And to understand the naivety, we have to remember the unique context of American history.
Which is that America is, historically speaking, an absolute infant.
Only 250 years old. Contrast that with Europe or Asia. Europe has a deeply ingrained intergenerational traumatic memory of centuries of devastating continental wars fought directly on its own soil.
The architecture of Europe is built on the rubble of previous wars.
America has never experienced that modern devastation at home, aside from its own civil war in the 1860s.
So the psychological reality for an American is that war is an export. War is something that happens over there, thousands of miles away.
Exactly. And because of that geographical isolation and lack of historical trauma, America has fostered a very specific, somewhat dangerous idealism.
The shining city on a hill complex.
Yes. The idea that America has a moral mandate to fix the world, to intervene, to engineer foreign societies into mirrors of itself.
The teenage surgeon steps in, convinced he can fix the patient. Think of the Bush administration in 2003.
Thinking they could just invade the Middle East, topple a dictator, and neatly install a Western-style democracy in a matter of months.
It is a profound, almost aggressive ignorance of history.
There is a very revealing anecdote from the source that highlights this disconnect. A U.S. Special Forces operator admitted that the policymakers in Washington have absolutely no clue about the sociological realities of the countries they are bombing,
They don't understand the tribal dynamics in Afghanistan.
or the deep religious schisms in Iraq. The troops on the ground realize within 48 hours that the mission is built on an academic fantasy.
While Washington continues to operate on spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations, they completely ignore deep religious and historical nuances.
And we are seeing this exact same dangerous naivety play out right now with Iran. Policymakers think they can just bomb Iran into submission or regime change, completely ignoring the thousands of years old nuances of Persian culture.
But here is where the naivety meets the greed. The opportunists in Washington weaponize this genuine American idealism to sell weapons.
Precisely. They use the soaring rhetoric of spreading freedom to mask the reality of selling $10 million missiles.
Okay, I am trying to synthesize the massive landscape we've just covered. because it paints a remarkably grim picture.
It does.
We have a military apparatus that is essentially an overpriced corporate scheme producing faulty weapons.
Right.
We have a political class bought by billionaires. We have a failing social contract where veterans are discarded. We even have decaying basic infrastructure.
The source mentions a 6-hour rickety train ride from Raleigh to Washington, D.C. on a rail system that feels completely outdated.
Right, which is a perfect physical metaphor for the institutional stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of this overwhelming evidence of rot, why on earth does the source actually conclude on an optimistic note about America's future?
Because the deep dive shifts its lens. It pulls back from the microscopic focus on Washington, D.C. and takes a massive macro view of the entire American continent.
Okay, what do they see?
Despite the undeniable institutional rot in the capital, the United States remains a nation of immense, almost incomprehensible resilience, raw entrepreneurship, and aggressive innovation.
And there is one massive metric that proves this vitality: energy.
Yes. The United States has achieved total energy independence. They have transformed into a massive global exporter of oil and gas.
Completely reversing the 1970s oil crisis dynamic.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? How do we reconcile the drug epidemics in places like California and politicians fighting on TV with this idea of a booming America?
To reconcile that, we have to look back at Alexis de Tocqueville, who traveled across America in the 1830s.
What did he observe?
Tocqueville observed that from the outside, American politics looks like a chaotic, polarized disaster on the verge of collapse.
Which sounds exactly like turning on any cable news network tonight.
But he noted that if you look under the surface, if you travel away from the capital, local life is actually quite calm and functional.
The source uses specific examples of driving through rural Florida and North Carolina, right?
Yes, even the so-called trailer parks aren't necessarily slums. Very often, they are pragmatic lifestyle choices. You'll see a modest modular home with an expensive late-model pickup truck parked right outside.
There is a baseline of material wealth and caloric abundance that is simply staggering when compared globally.
While Europe's GDP is stagnating, America's economy is flying away, driven by aggressive deregulation, regardless of which party is in power, and limitless access to cheap energy.
So the political chaos in Washington is almost like a distraction.
In many ways, America's true superpower is its lack of historical baggage. It allows the country the mental space to constantly reinvent itself.
To learn from massive failures like the impending failure with Iran and pivot quickly without losing its core vitality.
Exactly.
We have traversed a massive landscape today. From the sudden death of a political titan exposing the hidden momentum of military intervention to the Founding Fathers' worst fears coming true through big money.
We looked at the terrifying bloat of a $10 million missile that fails to hit its target.
And yet, beneath all of that undeniable rot, we found the undeniable raw economic engine of a country that simply refuses to stagnate.
It is a study in profound contradictions. And it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question that wasn't explicitly answered in the text.
Let's hear it.
The Founding Fathers brilliantly engineered constitutional checks and balances to restrain the political ambitions of 18th century men.
Right.
But as we look toward America's next 250 years, what entirely new branch of government or radical societal check will need to be invented to restrain the infinite financial and digital ambitions of the 21st century tech monopolies and AI?
Wow.
Can a piece of paper written with a Krill pen control algorithms and global capital?
That is a massive concept to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems you see, keep looking beneath the noisy headlines, and we will catch you next time.